Hello everyone, welcome to my reading wrap up for the months of October and November. I'm going to show you all the books that I read in the past 2 months, October and November. And yeah, I read some really good books, so let's get into it. The first book I read was I'm Thinking of Ending Things by Ian Reid. I did put this in a reading vlog. I'm going to give this like 4.5. I'm going to do 4.5 stars. I originally said 5 stars, but I'm going to give it 4.5. This is about a couple, a guy and a girl, and they're going to the boyfriend's house to like visit his family for dinner, and stuff starts going really wrong, and I don't know how to describe it, but you kind of read it and you just don't know what's going on until the very end, which I know that some people don't like in books, but I really liked it. I was like kind of confused, but at the same time, I knew weird stuff was going on, but it was weird. Like, it's a really weird story, and then you think about it, and I had to read like a bunch of like YouTube comments on the trailer and the movie, and I had to like read what other people had to say about it, and then I started to like fully understand the story. But I think it's really weird, and I think if you like stuff like that, like if you like stuff that makes you really think, then I think that you would like this book. The next book I read was Dark Harvest by Norman Partridge. I read this in that same reading vlog, and I loved this book. I'm gonna give this 4.5 to 4.75 stars, but I definitely like this one better than I'm Thinking of Ending Things. This book takes place on Halloween in 1963 in a really small town, and basically on Halloween every year, all the teenage boys are like locked up in their house for 5 days, and they're starved and they're stuck in that room, and then on Halloween night their parents let them out and they go hunting for this monster that haunts the town on Halloween, and the monster's name is Sawtooth Jack, and he looks like this is the monster, and he just like is a giant scarecrow, I guess, and he haunts the town every year on Halloween. Whichever boy finds him and gets the pumpkin on his head first, that boy wins, and that boy is then allowed to leave the town, pretty much. So it's kind of like a competition. I watched the movie for this as well, and I didn't love the movie, but I didn't hate the movie. But I think this book was so good. It was so fast-paced. It takes place on one night, and it's so good. It's just like Halloween vibes, a hunt going on. I loved everything about this book. The next book I read on my Kindle, and it was called The Good Lie by A.R. Torre. I'm gonna give this book 3.5 stars because I really enjoyed it, but it also took me a really long time to read. It took me like the whole month. I was just reading like little bits and pieces of it, and by the end, when I made it to the end, because it was a really short book, it just took me really long to read. I liked the reveal, but I just wasn't invested enough for it to like have the effect that it should have, you know? Like, I had read another A.R. Torre book and I didn't really like it, so I didn't have like super high expectations, but I loved this book when I started reading it. This book is about a serial killer called the Bloody Heart Killer, or the BH Killer, and all his victims have been like horrible victims, and then they're all teenage boys, and one of the teenage boys escaped, and he's like, I'm a victim, the BH killer was gonna get me, but I escaped. So everyone's kind of like, okay, because his story doesn't add up with the other victims, and his story doesn't make sense, and he lies about some things. But then this lawyer whose son was a victim, he employs this lady named Dr. Moore, and she's a psychiatrist, and he wants her to analyze the BH killer and just like see like what kind of person he would be so that they can track him down. But I really liked this book while I was reading it. I thought it was really well written and really fun, but there's something about it took me so long to read, and I think if I read it within like a few days, I would have loved it a lot more. But I still think it's a really good book. I'm gonna give it a really high 3.5 stars because I think it's really good, and I think if the premise sounds good to you, then you should read it. The next book I read this book basically the entire month of November, and that is Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. First of all, I listened to this audiobook and read it at the same time, and I 100% recommend that because for me, listening to the audiobook and having it read to me is really helpful. Like, I just understand it a lot more and I comprehend it a lot more. But I still have my bookmark in here because I just finished this last night. But I think the audiobook, I listened to the audiobook, the 1818 text narrated by Dan Stevens, and it was so good. Like, even at the very end, it had like music playing. It was really good. But I loved this book. I fully annotated it, like every page I annotated, and I literally think that this is one of my new all-time favorite books. I'm giving this book 5 stars, and this is like 6 stars actually. Like, I want this to have 6 stars because I loved it. I think I went into reading this with the perfect amount of knowledge of the story of Frankenstein because I didn't really know that much about it, but I had seen stuff about Frankenstein. Like, I knew what Frankenstein was, but I didn't really know what the story was. And I think that that was just perfect. Also, this was written over 200 years ago, and the writing was so easy to read. Like, none of the old English, none of that was difficult to comprehend or read at all. Like, this was a very easy book to read, and it's also really short. I have the large print edition, so like the words in mine are huge, but the normal edition of Frankenstein's only like 200 pages, so it's really short. But I love this book. I have books falling off my lap. The prose in this book and the quotes and just the story in general is so good, and the way that it went full circle completely is so good. I 100% recommend this book. You don't even have to like reading classics to love this book. Like, this book did not feel like a classic. It just felt like a really good book. And I just have to say, this book is a classic for a reason, and it's incredible, and you should read it. The last book I read this month was called Saving Noah by Lucinda Berry, and I just started it. I started that book and I didn't realize how sad it was going to be. It was really sad. It's basically like about this mom and her son does something horrible and she ends up paying for it a lot and he pays for it, and it's just really sad, and it really like tears apart her family, and I didn't really enjoy it while I was reading it, but I did finish it, and I think I'm going to give it like 2 stars, I think, because it was definitely a good book, but it just wasn't up my alley, I think. I did read it on my Kindle, so I don't have a physical copy, but I think Saving Noah was really sad, and I think if you read, I'm not going to talk about the synopsis because it's kind of bad. Like, her son does something really bad, but it was just like reading about a family that's like broken apart, and it was really sad. So these are all the books I read in the months of October and November, not including my Kindle books. I read so many good books in these past 2 months, and I love them all. All of them were like all of these were like 4 and 5 stars, and then I had 2 that I didn't really love, but that is so good for me. I love these books so much. I found an all-time favorite book, which I'm so excited about, and I hope that the month of December has some really good books in it too. I'll see you guys later. Bye.